Welcome to the UFO Enigma. Get ready to explore the mysteries of UFOs. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this intergalactic journey, where the truth is often stranger and more exciting than fiction. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know your thoughts, because the universe is full of secrets, and we're just getting started. The Starship Horizon glides through space. The vast expanse of space stretched out beyond the viewports, an endless sea of inky black, pierced only by the distant glimmer of stars. The Starship Horizon cut through the void like a glimmering needle, its silver hull reflecting the dying light of distant suns. Space was not truly silent. No, it hummed with a subtle energy. The engines beneath the ship pulsed rhythmically, their deep vibrations echoing through the hull like a heartbeat, keeping the crew alive in the cold vacuum of the universe. Commander Jack Mercer stood in the quiet corridor, his back leaning against the cold metal wall. A steaming cup of something that claimed to be coffee sat in his hand, though it tasted more like a bitter concoction created by an alien chemist, warm, harsh, and almost unbearable. Yet, it was the only thing that kept him awake as the ship glided smoothly through the cosmos. He stared out the narrow viewport at the swirling nebula ahead, a burst of purple and blue gases twisting in an intricate dance, a breathtakingly beautiful yet perilous anomaly, one of many they had encountered. It was hard to appreciate such beauty when every system they passed seemed to harbor a danger lurking just beneath the surface. Poisonous atmospheres, monstrous life forms, hostile factions. Each sector of space they navigated was a threat masked by beauty, a haunting reminder of how fragile life could be. But Jack had grown accustomed to the dangers. Now, it was all just another part of the routine. The moment the door to the observation deck slid open, a gentle but firm voice interrupted his thoughts. "Commander Mercer," she said, her voice lilting and serene, almost as if the very words were floating in the air, free from the weight of the universe. Jack turned, his eyes meeting the figure of Lyra, the Allari ambassador. She stood tall and graceful, almost like an ethereal presence. Her skin, pale with an opalescent sheen, shimmered in the dim light of the corridor. Her long ears, pointed and elegant, arched slightly, reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights. Her eyes, those eyes held an ever-changing hue. Now, they shimmered between deep blue and a sharp, stormy green, as if the sea itself had settled into her gaze. Lyra's presence was magnetic, but there was an unsettling distance to her, something that made her seem almost otherworldly. She wasn't like the humans Jack had grown used to. There was an aura around her, polished, perfect, but remote. "I would like to review the next planet on our route," she said, her tone measured, controlled. "Your pilot mentioned a gas giant with moons suitable for resource extraction. My people will want details." Jack smirked, unable to resist the urge to make light of the situation. "Yeah, Davis described it as big, round, and super gassy. I'm sure your council will love that analysis," he teased, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Lyra blinked, her gaze tilting slightly, as though she couldn't quite tell if he was joking or just being an idiot. She was far too diplomatic to show it, but there was a brief flicker of confusion in her eyes. "A thorough report will be appreciated," she replied, her voice calm, though Jack noticed the faintest shift in her expression. Jack took a sip of his questionable coffee and grimaced. The liquid slid down his throat like sandpaper, but it did the job. He glanced back at Lyra, wondering how long it would take before she simply walked away from him, as ambassadors often did. "Anything else?" he asked, his tone casual but a little too blunt. She hesitated, a rare crack in her composed demeanor. For a moment, her eyes softened. "Is there a reason you avoid speaking to me outside of mission briefings?" The question caught Jack off guard. He blinked, feeling a twinge of discomfort in his chest. "Avoid you," he echoed, raising an eyebrow. "No, I'm just giving you space. You're an ambassador, and I'm, well, not. Professional distance and all that." She studied him for a moment, her eyes shifting like the sea before a storm, and Jack felt an inexplicable unease coil in his stomach. Something in her gaze was changing, unreadable, distant, yet deeply searching. "I am here to understand humans," Lyra said, her voice soft but firm. "Not to be placed at a distance from them." Jack shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't great with feelings his own or anyone else's. The last thing he wanted was to become some awkward subject of study for an alien diplomat. But before he could respond, he fell back into his default mode of sarcasm, hoping to lighten the moment. "Well, if you wanted to understand humans, Ambassador," Jack said with a half-smile, "you're on the wrong ship. We're not exactly the best of the species. More like the awkward cousins no one invites to the holidays." Lyra blinked again, and to Jack's surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile, but it was close, a fleeting moment of something unguarded. "I find that unlikely," she said softly, the words holding a hint of something more. Jack chuckled despite himself. "Yeah, well, give it time." As they walked toward the bridge, the sounds of the crew's usual chaos floated in the background. Jack's mind wandered to his team, Davis, the pilot who had a tendency to argue with the navigation AI, and Ortega, the sharp-eyed, no-nonsense officer who somehow kept the ship from falling apart. They were a ragtag bunch, a collection of humanity's finest and most dysfunctional people, thrown together for a mission that was equal parts exploration and survival. "Your crew seems unconventional," Lyra remarked as they approached the bridge. Jack smirked. "Yeah, that's a nice word for it. Unconventional." As they stepped onto the bridge, the usual mayhem of the crew greeted them. Davis was mid-argument with the ship's AI, Alfred, about the metaphysical implications of fuel efficiency. Jack couldn't help but roll his eyes. It was another typical day aboard the Horizon. "Your crew is interesting," Lyra observed, her voice quieter now. Her eyes flicked to Davis, who was throwing his hands in the air in frustration. "Is this normal?" Jack's grin widened as he watched Davis flailing, completely oblivious to the diplomatic conversation happening behind him. "Yeah, it's pretty much the norm," he said, giving her an apologetic shrug. "Welcome to humanity." As the crew continued their chaotic dance of routine, Lyra stood silently, observing. Jack felt an odd weight in the air between them, a tension that wasn't entirely uncomfortable, but undeniably there. She was so different, yet there was something familiar in the way she observed and interacted with him, something that made him feel like an alien himself. For a fleeting moment, Jack wondered what it would be like to truly understand the Allari, to see the universe through her eyes, and perhaps even share in the complexities of her world. But as the sound of the intercom crackled to life, breaking the moment, Jack knew that the universe wasn't going to let him have that luxury. "Commander Mercer," the voice on the intercom called, and the adventure began once more. The ambush by Captain Vorgath. A sudden, violent jolt rocked the Horizon, shattering the relative calm of the ship. The bright, swirling nebula outside the viewport distorted as the ship's sensors picked up a hostile presence. "Unidentified vessel incoming," Ortega's voice crackled through the comms, her tone tight. "They're dropping out of warp right on top of us." Jack Mercer's hand instinctively gripped the console, his eyes narrowing as the black void of space outside the viewport was suddenly marred by the jagged silhouette of an approaching ship, a rusted heap of metal, held together by brute force and a defiant will. The pirate ship loomed like a wounded beast, its hulking frame jagged and unnatural against the serene backdrop of the stars. "This is Captain Vorgath of the Blackthorn," a voice rasped over the comm, rough and filled with menace. "Surrender your cargo and no one gets hurt." Jack stood tall, his fingers tightening around the edge of the control panel. His eyes flicked toward Lyra, who stood silently beside him, her expression unreadable but focused. "Captain Vorgath." Jack's voice was calm, with just the slightest edge of challenge. "I don't think you know who you're dealing with. This isn't the sort of cargo you want." There was a long, pregnant pause before Vorgath's voice returned, low and threatening. "Surrender your goods or face the consequences, human. We will take everything, including your Allari ambassador." The last words hit like a sudden blow, and Jack felt a jolt of unease rush through him. Lyra stood perfectly still, her eyes flashing briefly before they softened into something distant, unreadable. "Not happening," Jack replied sharply. "You'll regret this." A soft hum filled the bridge as the pirate ship's weapons powered up, their targeting systems locking onto the horizon. Confrontation in the corridors. The alarms blared in every corner of the horizon as the unmistakable sound of enemy fire rattled the ship. The first blast hit the shields with a violent shockwave, throwing Jack and Lyra off balance. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered briefly, casting the bridge in an eerie half-light. "We've got incoming," Ortega shouted, her voice taut with urgency. "They're boarding the ship." Through the windows, the pirate ship's boarding pods shot toward the horizon, launching with a sickening precision. The pods collided with the hull, their magnetic hooks locking into place with a loud, metallic thud. A hiss of pressure filled the air as the atmosphere in the ship's docking bays began to shift. Jack gritted his teeth, eyes scanning the chaotic scene unfolding around him. "Lyra," he said, his voice tense, "stick close." But Lyra, with her characteristic grace, was already moving toward the door. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly as she stepped out onto the bridge's catwalk. Jack hesitated for only a moment, then followed. The hallway ahead was filled with the heavy thuds of boots pounding the metal floors. Pirates, armed with crude but deadly weapons, stormed the ship, their snarls echoing off the walls. Jack could hear the crackling of blasters and the occasional scream as one of the pirates struck down a crew member. "Hold them back," Jack said under his breath as he gripped his sidearm and took cover behind a reinforced pillar. His heart raced, but there was no time for hesitation. He had to protect the ship, and Lyra was an unexpected wild card in this deadly game. In the midst of the chaos, Lyra stepped forward, her expression calm and unreadable. The pirates hesitated, momentarily thrown by her otherworldly presence. Without a word, she raised her hand in a swift, fluid motion, and in an instant, the first pirate was disarmed, his weapon flying from his hand as if it had been ripped by an invisible force. Her eyes shimmered with a deep, shifting glow as she moved through the pirates with unnatural speed and grace. The aliens, at first confused and disoriented by her display, quickly learned not to underestimate her. Lyra's alien abilities were becoming increasingly apparent as she dispatched one pirate after another, her movements so precise and fluid that it almost looked like a dance, each strike a sharp, calculated move. Jack watched, his breath caught in his throat. He had never seen anything like it before. Lyra's actions were mesmerizing, an elegant force of nature, dismantling the pirates' assault as if they were little more than children playing at war. Under fire and finding understanding. The sounds of blaster fire reverberated through the ship, the thumping of Jack's heart matching the pounding of the alarms. The horizon groaned under the strain, and the air felt heavy, thick with the weight of impending death. Yet, a amid the chaos, there was something raw and human in Jack's thoughts and awareness that this situation was not something he could handle alone. As the pirate leader, Vorgath, gave orders to his crew over the comm, Jack found his thoughts shifting unexpectedly toward Lyra. She wasn't just the diplomat, the observer from another world, she was something more. In the middle of all this madness, Jack began to see her not just as an ambassador but as a person, a being who had her own way of fighting, of understanding the universe. Lyra, he called over the gunfire, his voice strained. What's your plan here? How do we get out of this? Lyra paused for a brief moment, looking at him with eyes that seemed to penetrate into his soul. There was something in her gaze, an unspoken understanding that stretched far beyond the chaos of battle. Her lips parted, and for the first time since their journey began, there was a flicker of vulnerability in her expression. We need to survive, Jack, she said, her voice steady but quieter now, as the last of the pirates were subdued. And we need to work together. Your species is chaotic, but there is strength in that chaos. Jack nodded, a slow grin forming on his face despite the tension. He had always known humanity was far from perfect, but in that moment, Lyra's words felt like a small victory. Perhaps their chaotic nature was exactly what would save them. The pirates had underestimated them, and now they had to make sure they didn't repeat that mistake. Lyra turned away, her figure already moving towards the next challenge. She didn't need reassurance, not like Jack did. She was calm, unwavering, exactly what they needed. But Jack couldn't help but feel a new sense of respect for her, and for the Allari species as a whole. As they moved deeper into the ship, preparing for the next wave of the attack, Jack found himself thinking that this chaotic, unpredictable crew, this strange, broken family might just be strong enough to survive anything the universe threw at them. The escape plan. The horizon shuddered once again as another barrage of pirate fire collided with its shields, the ship groaning under the stress of battle. Jack gripped the armrest of his chair, his eyes darting from one screen to another, trying to make sense of the overwhelming data. 3 pirate ships, Vorgatha's flagship and 2 others, were closing in, their jagged forms filling the view screen like a storm of metal and fire. We can't outrun them, Ortega called out, her hands flying across the console, trying to push the horizon into evasive maneuvers. They're too fast, and our engines are barely holding up. Jack glanced at Lyra, who stood silently at the far side of the bridge, her eyes glinting with a deep, almost otherworldly focus. The crew was battered, their options running thin, but there was one thing Jack hadn't given up on yet, the Allari ambassador. Lyra, Jack said, his voice tense with the weight of the situation. Any ideas? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes seemed to gaze far beyond the walls of the bridge, her senses reaching out into the void, attuned to something Jack couldn't understand. For a moment, she appeared lost in thought, her brow furrowed as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, finally, she spoke. We take them into the Nebula, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. The Nebula will blind their sensors. We won't be able to rely on our systems, but they won't be able to track us either. The words hung in the air for a moment. A nebula, a swirling mass of gas and dust, filled with electromagnetic interference and pockets of ionized particles, would create the perfect cover for their escape, but it also came with its own dangers. The horizon would be flying blind. We won't be able to navigate without our sensors, Ortega muttered, her voice laced with doubt. Trust me, Lyra said, her gaze locking with Jack's. I can feel their movements. I will guide you. The unseen guide. As the horizon plunged into the nebula, the ship was immediately surrounded by a thick, shimmering haze of violet and blue. The stars outside faded into nothingness, swallowed by the dense clouds of gas. The familiar hum of the ship's engines now seemed distant, muffled by the disorienting vastness around them. The ship's once pristine sensors blinked out, replaced by static and fragmented readings that made the bridge feel like a place lost in a fog, disconnected from the rest of the universe. Lyra's eyes shimmered, turning to a brilliant silver as she stood at the heart of the bridge, focusing intently. She wasn't just relying on the ship's systems, she was using something deeper, something innate. Her long ears twitched slightly as if listening to the vibrations of space itself. "Slow down," Lyra instructed, her voice steady as she spoke to Ortega, who was at the helm. "There's a pocket of turbulence ahead. If we go too fast, we'll lose control." Ortega's hands hovered over the controls, hesitating for a moment, then following Lyra's guidance. Jack watched, his expression taut with tension. He knew this was their only chance, but there was something about Lyra's calm that gave him a strange sense of peace. She wasn't just reacting to the environment, she was feeling it, something beyond human comprehension. Lyra's eyes shifted, their color deepening to a rich, molten gold, and Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The power she wielded was unlike anything he had ever encountered. She wasn't using technology or logic to guide the ship, she was connecting with the very fabric of the nebula itself, sensing the subtle fluctuations of energy that the pirate ships could not. "They're close," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. "The pirates are trying to lock onto us again. Their engines, they're growing erratic. Can you guide us through this?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if he feared disturbing her concentration. Her eyes flashed back to him, full of resolve. "I can." The final showdown. The bridge was thick with the hum of the ship's failing systems, the constant crackle of static filling the air as the pirate ships loomed in the distance, their shapes barely visible through the mist of the nebula. The ship rocked again as another pirate shot missed by mere inches, sending a tremor through the hull. "Come on, Ortega, keep it steady," Jack urged, his heart pounding in his chest. Ortega was grimly focused, hands working the controls with precision, trying to follow Lyra's guidance as the horizon twisted and turned through the nebula, narrowly avoiding deadly blasts. It felt like an impossible game of cat and mouse, but Jack knew that they had the edge if they could just make it long enough. Lyra, standing at the center of the bridge, spoke with quiet confidence. "Now, hard right. There's an opening in the gas clouds. One of their ships is moving too close to the center of the nebula. They're exposing their weak spot." Without hesitation, Ortega followed Lyra's command. The ship groaned as it tilted sharply to the right, its engines flaring in response, and the distant silhouette of one pirate ship came into view. It was moving blindly, unable to track them in the dense mist, and now, with Lyra's guidance, they had the perfect shot. Jack's pulse quickened as he looked at Davis. "Take the shot." Davis grinned, his hands flying over the weapons console with practiced ease. The Horizon's weapons systems whirred to life, the air charged with the energy of their weapons as a bolt of plasma shot out into the dark, piercing the nebula like a comet. The pirate ship erupted in a fiery explosion, the shockwave rippling through the gas clouds. The pirate vessel twisted in space, disabled, drifting helplessly in the wake of the blast. For a brief moment, there was silence on the bridge, just the faint hum of the Horizon's engines and the distant crackle of static. The crew held their breath, waiting for the pirates' next move. But Lyra's voice cut through the tension. "They're scattering. They're disoriented. Now is our chance." Jack nodded, his voice low but full of determination. "We finished this. Now." As the pirates reeled from the surprise attack, Jack felt a surge of hope. The Allari ambassador had done the impossible. She had guided them through the chaos, relying on an instinct Jack could never hope to match. She was their key to survival. With Lyra at the helm, they were no longer the prey, they had become the hunters. The pirates, so sure of their power moments ago, were now scrambling to regroup, but the horizon was already out of their reach, guided by Lyra's unfathomable abilities. As the last pirate ship veered off course, Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes on Lyra, who stood at the center of the bridge. She had become more than just a diplomat, she was their lifeline, their strength in the void of space. "Good work, Ambassador," Jack said, his voice full of respect. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes softening with something Jack hadn't seen before, a fleeting warmth, a hint of appreciation. "You trusted me," she said simply, her voice almost a whisper. Jack met her gaze, his heart steady but full of a new understanding. "I had to." And for the first time in the heart of the Nebula, surrounded by the remnants of the battle, Jack realized just how far they had come, not just in escaping the pirates, but in the bond they had forged. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they had control. And they were ready to face whatever came next. The pirates' flagship closes in. The horizon shook violently as another blast from the pirate flagship tore through the nebula's mist, sending shudders through the ship's frame. The hull groaned in protest, a deep, resonant sound that filled every corner of the bridge. Jack's knuckles whitened around the armrests as he stared at the view screen, his heart pounding. The Blackthorn loomed like a monstrous shadow, a fortress of rusted metal bristling with weapons, its massive cannons aiming directly at the horizon. The bridge was alive with activity, alarms blaring, crew members shouting commands, and systems crackling with energy. Jack's gaze flicked to Lyra, who stood calmly at the center of the chaos, her silver eyes scanning the displays. Her presence was a calming force in the midst of the storm, but Jack could sense the tension in her as well. She knew what was at stake. "We need to get out of their line of fire," Jack said, his voice tight. "Lyra, we need your help. Now." Lyra nodded without hesitation, her eyes shifting to a molten gold, glowing softly in the dim light. She raised her hands, her fingers twitching slightly as if she were reaching for something beyond the physical world. Her entire focus seemed to shift into another plane of existence, connecting with the fabric of the nebula itself. "Trust me," she said, her voice a whisper against the chaos. "The pirates are too focused on brute force. They will predict your every move. We need to be unpredictable." Jack glanced at Ortega, who was gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. "Ortega, follow her lead. Stay light on your feet." As the Blackthorn fired again, the ship's massive guns lighting up the nebula in a flash of brilliance, Jack could see the pirate ship's relentless pursuit, its guns aiming with precision, and the gleaming trajectory of the deadly blasts. With Lyra's guidance, the horizon dove into a sharp bank, slipping between pockets of gaseous cloud, narrowly avoiding a devastating volley. The bridge quivered with the force of another near miss, the hull groaning in protest as the shields strained to hold. Lyra's voice was clear and sure, guiding Ortega through a series of evasive maneuvers, each one more daring than the last. "Turn now, 45 degrees right. Bring the bow up. They're preparing to fire again." Ortega's hands flew across the controls, the ship's engines roaring as the horizon spun in space, dodging and weaving through the nebula's dense clouds. The pirates' shots missed by mere inches, and the crew could feel the tension in the air, the sense of danger hanging like a thick fog. "The pirate ship is destroyed," The Blackthorn was closing in, its guns lighting up the nebula with every shot, but it was too slow. The Horizon was too nimble, its unpredictable movements making it almost impossible for the pirates to lock onto their target. And then, with Lyra's guidance, the moment came. Now. Lyra's voice rang out, steady and powerful. Hard left. Now. Ortega pulled the ship into a sudden, sharp turn, using the nebula's interference to their advantage. As the Horizon darted into the cloud, the Blackthorn's flagship took one last shot, its massive plasma cannon firing in desperation. But it was too late. The Horizon emerged from the mist just as the shot missed, its engines roaring to life. With a flash of brilliance, the Horizon returned fire, a single, powerful blast that struck the heart of the pirate ship's exposed flank. The explosion was devastating, an eruption of flame and debris that tore through the flagship's hull, consuming its engines in a fiery explosion. The shockwave rattled the Horizon, throwing the crew forward, but the Blackthorn was no more. The pirate ship broke apart, its jagged remains floating lifelessly in the void, swallowed by the nebula. The bridge was eerily quiet for a moment, save for the hum of the ship's remaining systems and the distant rumble of the destroyed pirate vessel. Then, the crew exhaled, as if the entire weight of the universe had lifted. A moment of relief. Jack sat back in his chair, his breath coming in slow, steadying gasps. The Horizon was battered but alive. The crew was safe. And for the first time since the battle began, he allowed himself a moment to relax. That was too close, Ortega muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. I thought we were done for. Jack managed a tired smile, glancing over at Davis, who was still grinning despite the chaos. You know, Jack said, his voice rough with exhaustion, we really do make a good team. Lyra, who had been standing by the viewport, her eyes scanning the debris of the destroyed pirate ship, turned toward him. The silver sheen of her eyes faded, softening into something less alien, more human. There was a brief moment of silence, a connection forged through the shared chaos of the battle. You were remarkable, Jack said, his voice low, the words slipping out before he could stop them. I mean, I knew you were capable, but that was something else. Lyra's lips curled upward in the faintest of smiles, her eyes warm. You trusted me, she said simply, her voice carrying an undertone of something deeper. That made all the difference. Jack chuckled softly, his awkwardness surfacing once more. Yeah, well, I figured I didn't have much of a choice. As the tension in the bridge eased, the crew shared a quiet moment of camaraderie. They had survived, against the odds. The pirates were gone, and the Horizon was free at least for now. Jack's gaze lingered on Lyra for a moment longer, his thoughts suddenly uncertain. He had grown to trust her, to respect her not just as an ambassador, but as a person. But he still wasn't entirely sure how to express it. By the way, he said, his voice more awkward than he intended, you looked beautiful today, Lyra. The moment hung in the air, and for a second, Jack thought he might have made a mistake, but then, Lyra's soft laughter broke the tension. It was light, genuine, something new, and unguarded. You are an idiot, she said, her smile widening, her eyes flashing a brighter shade of gold. Jack grinned back, relief washing over him. Yeah, but I'm your idiot. The crew chuckled, the camaraderie filling the space between them. The Horizon had been through hell and back, but it had emerged victorious, and for the first time, Jack felt that strange bond of understanding between him and Lyra, something that was more than just diplomacy. As the ship sailed deeper into the vastness of space, ready to face whatever came next, Jack knew this was only the beginning. But with Lyra by his side, He felt ready for whatever the universe could throw at them. The adventure was far from over. That's it for today's cosmic adventure. We hope you enjoyed the wild ride through the stars, and we want to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment below, share your theories, or tell us what mystery you want us to explore next. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and activate the bell for more thrilling tales from the farthest reaches of space. The journey is just beginning, and there's so much more to discover, so stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode. The universe is waiting. That's it for today's cosmic adventure. We hope you enjoyed the wild ride through the stars, and we want to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment below, share your theories, or tell us what mystery you want us to explore next. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and activate the bell for more thrilling tales from the farthest reaches of space. The journey is just beginning, and there's so much more to discover, so stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode. The universe is waiting.